Sometimes she would stick her claws in his face out of sheer gaiety of heart, but he never dared to touch her because of the uncertain weight of his hand upon a creature so frail. Besides, he rather liked to be tickled, and after a time he would put some clumsy questions to his mother. "Mother," he would say, "if it's good to work, why doesn't everyone work?" His mother would look up at him and answer, "It's good for the likes of us." He would meditate, "Why?" And going unanswered, "What's work for, mother? Why do I cut chalk and you wash clothes, day after day, while Lady Wondershoot goes about in her carriage, mother, and travels off to those beautiful foreign countries you and I mustn't see, mother?" "She's a lady," said Mrs. Cattles. "Oh," said young Cattles, and meditated profoundly. "If there wasn't gentlefolk to make work for us to do," said Mrs. Cattles, "how should we poor people get a living?" This had to be digested. "Mother," he tried again, "if there wasn't any gentlefolks, wouldn't this belong to people like me and you, and if they did—" "Lord's sakes, and drat the boy!" Mrs. Cattles would say. She had with the help of a good memory become quite a florid and vigorous individuality since Mrs. Skinner died. "Since your poor dear grandma was took, there's no abiding you. Don't you ask no questions, and you won't be told no lies. If once I was to start out answering you serious, your father'd have a go, and ask some one else for his supper, let alone finishing the washing." "All right, mother," he would say, after a wondering stare at her. "I didn't mean to worry." And he would go on thinking. 5. He was thinking too 4 years after, when the vicar, now no longer ripe but overripe, saw him for the last time of all. You figured the old gentleman visibly a little older now, slacker in his girth, a little coarsened and a little weakened in his thought and speech, with a quivering shakiness in his hand and a quivering shakiness in his convictions, but his eyes still bright and merry for all the trouble the food had caused his village and himself. He had been frightened at times and disturbed, but was he not alive still and the same still? And 15 long years, a fair sample of eternity, had turned the trouble into use and want. "It was a disturbance, I admit," he would say, "and things are different in many ways. There was a time when a boy could weed, but now a man must go out with axe and crowbar, in some places down by the thickets at least, and it's still a little strange to us old-fashioned people for all this valley, even what used to be the river bed before they irrigated, to be under wheat, as it is this year, 25 feet high. They used the old-fashioned scythe here 20 years ago, and they would bring home the harvest on a wain, rejoicing, in a simple honest tradition. A little simple drunkenness, a little frank love-making, to conclude. Poor dear Lady Wondershoot, she didn't like those innovations. Very conservative, poor dear lady, a touch of the 18th century about her, I always said. Her language, for example, bluff vigour. She died comparatively poor. These big weeds got into her garden. She was not one of those gardening women, but she liked her garden in order, things growing where they were planted, and as they were planted, under control. The way things grew was unexpected, upset her ideas. She didn't like the perpetual invasion of this young monster. At last she began to fancy he was always gaping at her over her wall. She didn't like his being nearly as high as her house. Jarred with her sense of proportion. Poor dear lady. I had hoped she would last my time. It was the big cockchafers we had for a year or so that decided her. They came from the giant larvae, nasty things as big as rats, in the valley turf. And the ants no doubt weighed with her also. Since everything was upset and there was no peace and quietness anywhere now, she said she thought she might just as well be at Monte Carlo as anywhere else, and she went. She played pretty boldly, I'm told. Died in a hotel there. Very sad end. Exile. Not what one considers meet. A natural leader of our English people. Uprooted. So I—" "Yet after all," harped the vicar, "it comes to very little. A nuisance, of course. Children cannot run about so freely as they used to do, what with ant bites and so forth. Perhaps it's as well. There used to be talk, as though this stuff would revolutionize everything. But there is something that defies all these forces of the new. I don't know, of course. I'm not one of your modern philosophers. Explain everything with ether and atoms, evolution, rubbish like that. What I mean is something the ologies don't include. Matter of reason, not understanding, ripe wisdom, human nature. Ere perennius. Call it what you will." And so at last it came to the last time. The vicar had no intimation of what lay so close upon him. He did his customary walk over by Farthing Down, as he had done it for more than a score of years, and so to the place whence he would catch young Cattles. He did the rise over by the chalk pit crest a little puffily. He had long since lost the muscular Christian stride of early days, but Cattles was not at his work, and then, as he skirted the thicket of giant bracken that was beginning to obscure and overshadow the hangar, he came upon the monster's huge form seated on the hill, brooding as it were upon the world. Cattle's knees were drawn up, his cheek was on his hand, his head a little aslant. He sat with his shoulder towards the vicar, so that those perplexed eyes could not be seen. He must have been thinking very intently; at any rate he was sitting very still. He never turned round; he never knew that the vicar, who had played so large a part in shaping his life, looked then at him for the very last of innumerable times, did not know even that he was there. So it is so many partings happen. The vicar was struck at the time by the fact that, after all, no one on earth had the slightest idea of what this great monster thought about when he saw fit to rest from his labours. But he was too indolent to follow up that new theme that day. It fell back from its suggestions into his older grooves of thought. "Aere perennius," he whispered, walking slowly homeward by a path that no longer ran straight athwart the turf after its former fashion, but wound circuitously to avoid new-sprung tussocks of giant grass. No, nothing has changed. Dimensions are nothing. The simple round, the common way. And that night, quite painlessly and all unknowing, he himself went the common way, out of this mystery of change he had spent his life in denying. They buried him in the churchyard of Cheesing Eyebright, near the largest yew, and the modest tombstone bearing his epitaph, it ended with "Ut in principio nunc est et semper," was almost immediately hidden from the eye of man by a spread of giant, grey-tasseled grass, too stout for scythe or sheep, that came sweeping like a fog over the village out of the germinating moisture of the valley meadows in which the food of the gods had been working. End of Book 2, Chapter 2. End of Book 2 of The Food of the Gods and How It Came to Earth. Recording by Alex Heatelander, Davis, California. www.alexheatelander.com